Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with I don't even know what word to use this week because boy, this is going to be a special episode. Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, what's
Hey,
the haps?
I'm totally relaxed because what I did relaxed. I had an easier time than you did. The big thing I did was I went and saw the Barbie movie, which is phenomenal. I highly recommend it. I think it's one of those cinematic achievements. Like, seriously, I'm not kidding. That, like, I can't believe they made a movie that's that funny and that poignant and relevant and gets you to think about all kinds of underpinnings of society. I mean, wow. I was really, really impressed. Yeah, it
Well,
was really cool. So the rest of my weekend was just kind of doing the usual stuff, and I got proper rest and sleep. What did you do?
I went to Gen Con. I did not get proper rest or proper sleep. I got home last night at about 7 p.m. and said, I'm going to take a little nap before dinner, and then woke up at about 8 o'clock this morning. So let's just say dinner or any proper thing did not happen. It
Yeah.
was it was a huge show. They haven't released the numbers yet, but they sold out of badges. And someone told me that they sold out of events so that every single ticket of every single event was sold. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I was told.
Wow.
Uh,
I
so
mean, even
take
if
that
it's
with
not
a big grain of
entirely
salt.
true, it just tells you that it's at that level of wow, that's incredible. Oof. It felt that way. I mean, Gen Con felt
And
huge before it
yeah,
started. Like
yeah,
like it was a storm
right.
just gathering and breaking and yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and I've spent more time at a booth. I'd been at booths for 20 minutes or right helping someone out or hey, could you watch the booth while that sort of thing. I was in the booth for several hours for multiple days. And so that was a new experience for me to sort of see the madness instead of being within the madness, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. But then I spent the most time at meetings that I've ever spent at. Uh, and these were meetings where like important things, life things were happening,
Wow.
right? So I'm like, then I'm going back to the room at night already late going okay, I'm gonna sit here and do math in my head for the next 5 hours. Oh look, it's 8 a.m. and I have a meeting in a half an hour. Let's do it all again. So it was one of those shows. Very little gameplay happened.
Mm,
Lots of meetings happened.
that's some
So
work.
but we'll have a little bit of news coming from Gen Con here coming up. So did you have any specific questions?
No, I mean, that sounds fascinating. I mean, I have a million questions, but that sounds fascinating. And I've had some conventions that
Yeah.
were like that. I generally try to really like play and DM hard at cons and reserve
Mhm.
meetings for sort of small focused areas. But it is exciting and it is hard because you're on, even if you're with friends that you know that you've worked with in these kinds of meetings a lot, you're still trying to represent the game, whoever you're
Mhm.
kind of theoretically representing in addition. Yeah, it's exhausting. So hats off to you, my friend, for going through that. That's a lot. You deserve a lot of rest. But let's make a
Oh,
podcast.
I got a lot of rest last night, but here we go. Let's do this.
Hmm.
And we're going to start, as we always start, with our listener corner. Quite a few this week again. So thank you for everyone who's listening who brings us your questions, whether it's via Blue Sky now or Twitter or X or X Twitter or Twitter X or whatever Patreon, whatever you use. Keep them coming. First, we have Kurt Ugle via YouTube, one that I didn't mention. Do you know the origin of the design choice for the varied levels and amount of subclass features? Was this part of D&D Next? I find the erratic structure baffling. For example, a paladin has a fourth subclass feature at level 20, but many end at 14. Fighter has 5, which is the most, and the bard only has 3, which is the least. So, audience, what is the optimal subclass spread and amount of features? Should one D&D add more? And then he goes forward, Kurt does, and gives us the breakdown of each level of a subclass and what they get a feature at. And so thank you for that question. And I mean, it's a great question, very detailed and lots of, unfortunately, the answer is very simple, which is the designers wanted to give something to players at every level. And so they create a class that gives a certain amount of, let's call them class abilities at specific levels. Then they look and say, oh, we don't have something to give the fighter at 3, 7, 10, 15, and 18. So when we build our subclasses, that's where we will put things. The bard gets spells. A new level of spell, they obviously consider a new class ability. So bards have these things, they get them here, there. Oh, we only have 3 levels where we need to give the bard something. That happens to be at 3, 6, and 14. So in order to keep all of the subclass granting levels something new, you would have to go through at the same levels. Then you would have to go back and design all the classes to give something at all the same levels, which is a magnitude of order harder than just, you know, readjusting things a bit and then using the subclasses to fill in those blanks. And then the question is, do we really need to give the players something at every level? Because if you didn't need to do that, then it would make this a lot simpler and a lot easier to unify. And now I'm going to sit down and let Teos add his thoughts.
In my day, Shawn, they didn't give us anything when we leveled. We liked it. We liked it fine.
We got hit points. That's all we needed.
That's all we needed. We played all day. We were sad, but we played. No. You know, I think that there is there's another aspect to this, which is that subclasses are replacing the prestige classes and paragon paths and epic destinies, whatever they were called,
epic destinies,
yeah, of 3rd and 4th edition. And they're trying to do it in a way that feels more like the class and less like go to this other section of the book and choose a thing, which felt a little disconnected at times. So to do that, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, this is all one thing. A fighter is like this, and it feels like a fighter. What does a fighter do? Well, it takes a lot of little training things. So the subclasses are going to reflect that, right? And maybe the bard, yeah, most of your stuff is really about your spells and your core class things. So we're just going to add a few touches here and there. And that was probably a fine plan at the beginning. When Kurt says, you know, what should it be? Open question, right? It depends on what you want your class design to achieve. I think that if we look at what were the probable goals of this system, we can, after many years of 5e play, see that in general, it's really hard to get a subclass's flavor to feel strong enough early enough. You play for so few levels that when you get your main feature at 3rd, 5th level, you might be about to retire your campaign at that point and your character. And you didn't get to experience all these later things. So if you have things that are later on in the cycle, you know, maybe they need to add to the things you got earlier, which we'll touch on a later question, versus be new things, new aspects, new expressions, because you otherwise don't ever get to have those. The other thing that we saw with when they went into doing Strixhaven was that they wanted to say, hey, everybody gets a subclass that is your school that you're studying, and then they realized, well, this is a really big problem because not everybody gets it at the same level and has the same progression. What do we do about that when you've got an adventure of level X? And so that's kind of part of the reason that led them to think, gee, you know, maybe we did the wrong thing when we both varied the starting level and the progression. Now, of course, since then, in Unearthed Arcana, Jeremy has said that maybe we do want to always start at 3rd, but change when you get it to again reflect that class. I don't know. I tend to think that standardizing is better. I tend to think that probably you are better off just as a designer knowing that, hey, I hang my hat on the following levels is when you express a subclass, and the class works around that rather than the subclass fitting into the class. But I don't know how you feel about it or what you think of all this.
Yeah, it's what do you want the game to be? is the question. What do you want the game to be? Because you can do it X number of ways, where X is a large positive integer. You could do it many, 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 many different ways. And what you have to do is go back to the beginning and say, how do we want this experience to play out at the table? How do we want this experience to play out as people build their characters? Do we want to make it a very complicated process of building your character to make it fun for people away from the table? And then they'll have fun at the table no matter what. Right. Or do you say we want to make it as simple as possible to build the character and let that fun play out at the table? It really goes into the next question, which I'm going to read right now.
Yeah.
Which is from Jack of Hearts 42 via YouTube. What are your thoughts on TTRPG characters gaining many more tools and abilities at higher levels versus gaining expanding use of earlier abilities? How do you think it impacts the complexity and thus aversion of high-level play in D&D? I see heroes in other media just getting better and better at what they start out knowing how to do. And that's a great question. And that goes to what I just said. What do you want the game to be like? Do you want the game to be a fighter, which is you're good at hitting things with your sword? And so at higher levels, you're good at hitting things with your sword 4 times. Mm-hmm. Or do you want it to be you're a spellcaster, and at low levels, you can make this little tiny flame that does damage, and at higher levels, you can make really big flames that do more damage? Or is it that you want the spellcasters to be able to do 72 different things, all completely different, as opposed to 4 things that are completely different at first level? Yeah. What you need to look at is, does the complexity that you create add to the fun of the game? Because as the complexity goes up, enjoyment may go down for a significant portion of your player base. So the rising complexity needs to have a corresponding rise in the fun of the game. And if the complexity rising leads to falling fun, then you need to lower the level of the complexity to marry to the increasing but more slowly increasing fun that a majority of your players are going to have.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like it's a fascinating choice because it affects so much, and we'll see in more like in other simpler role playing games, in OSR style D&D games, you see where it really is more of the like you have a ball of flame you chuck, and as you gain more points, levels, whatever's, you get to do more often or harder, right? More flamer, and that's all it is. And there is just flame, like the wizard is flame, right? D&D tries to do many more things and has many more source books and can give you more options. So therefore, it doesn't lock itself into flame ball only. It has more variety because it knows it needs to have that space to express itself. And then we see those things like subclasses that can really vary in their approach. But yes, they have to answer these questions that you're talking about, Shawn, because if you spread it too thin, and we see that, I mean, some of the Tasha's subclasses can have some things that it's like, well, you've got a tentacle that attacks for you, and here's what it does, and that'll show up again. But you also have this other thing and this other form, and that's it's not, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just that is what it's fighting. It's fighting that question of, should I be doing all like I have a tentacle and that's my story, or is it I am Far Realm, and here are these varying different expressions that tell that story, one of which is a tentacle, one of which is a what, and those are hard questions. It really is. You have to, it's something to keep in mind when you're designing, because it can feel less attractive. And one last thing, which is that as a player, getting a little more damage to your ball of flame can be cool. Certainly can be great from an optimization standpoint, but it can be less interesting and attractive. Whereas if you're going to get a different feature, that may call to you more and want you to get to those levels more so. And then the question is, does D&D support that? Because often the campaign ends when it's going to end, not because you wanted to get to be higher level.
Right. Because no matter what all of these things are, no matter what, whether it's the ball of flame getting bigger or having this wide menu of things that you can do, you still get one action, one bonus action, one reaction. And so while a player may look at a subclass or look at a class or look at any sort of role-playing game and how this progression works and say, oh, that's so boring, all I'm doing is adding a d6 every level, that may be the best thing for the game.
Yeah.
It may not be attractive while you're reading through the class. You may say, well, I want more options, or it may not be the best thing for the game. So
and
you're
that,
always weighing those things as a designer.
and I just want to emphasize that what you're saying is that when we try to create feel, we can try to want to use up all these possible reactions every round. And we see that in Tasha's. Tasha starts making these classes that it's not just because you're a rogue and you're doing this reliable thing. It's like really trying to express the class through every possible action, meaning the player expects to use those actions every single turn, sometimes choosing from a menu of them, and they can be very complex. And that requires a lot of tracking. It slows play. It may sound great on paper, but as you play it, you start getting exhausted by it, right? And we've talked about that before.
Right. And one thing that you could do then as a designer is say, rather than giving the choices at the table, I can give them the choices while they're creating. So you've just reached 17th level. Here are 5 things that you can choose. Once you choose it, though, that's yours. And that can seem good. And sometimes it works well. But then if there was an optimal choice, or if there was a choice that the player didn't realize they wanted, then that becomes, I should have done that. So that takes away the flexibility that some players want. So you're weighing that as well if you choose to go that direction. It's a complicated thing, and I'm glad I'm not making a full-on game at this point in my life. Yeah. So kudos. Anything else to add for Jack of Hearts 42 on that question?
Nope.
Okay, then we will move on to, we've gone up by 1. We have Rushbolt 43 via YouTube. So we've gone from 42 to 43. I've been following the Tales of the Valiant progress and purchased the alpha release. The alpha still only contains 5 levels for 4 classes. Kobold Press has also released some material on the Druid and Ranger to its backers. With the physical books due in April of 2024, I feel 9 months is not enough time to complete testing and feedback on spells, class features, feats, monsters, etc. At some point, I feel Kobold Press may need to abandon releasing changes to the public for feedback to meet the deadline. Do you think small companies like Kobold Press should avoid public playtests due to the extra work needed to release them and review the feedback? Or is the marketing value of having a public playtest worth the effort, even if it greatly increases the difficulty in releasing the project on time? As 2 people that are familiar with deadlines, I feel you may both be able to provide insight on this process I might not have considered. Thank you for all that you do to entertain and educate the community. Thank you, Rushbolt 43. That question is so good that I'm going to let Teos answer it.
I think spot on. Rushbolt's just killing it with saying, hey, marketing value. I mean, you want to get the rules right, but in theory, you can get enough designers in a room and come up with great ideas. The public playtest, I think, is really largely about, especially for a smaller company, a public playtest is about marketing and fan integration, less so than it is when you are at the D&D level. It's still those things, but also you can fail to capture the wide variety of players that are out there. I'm not sure that Tales of the Valiant has the same breadth of players and needs to have the same breadth of players. It can find fans that really want to do X or Y and be a great game. D&D, if it really wants to be enormous, as it usually is, it wants that kind of benefit that the D&D Next play tests provided. So I think the marketing value is a big part of this. And that's why we probably see that there is, finally the Kickstarter and the alpha version, and probably we'll see fewer of those releases. And then just one other thing, and I'll shut up and let you go, Shawn, but that is that I do think all of these companies are working under too short a time to create a game. But at some point, I don't know that any length is good enough. Like, it's just, role-playing games are going to be imperfect. And the company has to at some point say, well, how much longer do I give this when I would like to start making money from this product?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you have a smaller, as Teos wisely said, when you have a smaller pool of fans that you need to satisfy, you can do so much more quickly. Cobalt Press, you name the company, Ghostfire Gaming, anyone can succeed by having a pool of X, right? 20,000, 30,000 fans. We can make good stuff for them. Wizards of the Coast and D&D needs to satisfy millions of fans to really succeed. So it's going to be a different process. And as Teos also said, no matter the amount of playtesting that you do, you're going to miss things. So marketing is important. Gathering the information you need to know what kind of game your fan base wants is as important as hammering out every single mathematical detail in the long run, because that information, as we've talked about with the previous two questions, what kind of game do you want? We can give you the kind of game you want. We need to know what that is, and then we can tweak those numbers to make it, or the amount of content we can tweak to make it work.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, we have Toast Milk via Patreon Discord. I was going to say 44 just to keep the number going, but we ran out there. We only go up to 43 on this show.
Darn shame.
I come from a creative arts background and training. In my years as a student and studying art, the one rule that has borne out to be the most accurate about any creative endeavor is that you have to know the rules in order to break them. Amen. In other words, rules are meant to be broken, and creativeness is a lot of experimentation, but breaking the rules just to break them is why we have a lot of things like bad free-form poetry. One needs to have an intention and an awareness of what you are going against to make it work, and what keeps creative acts fresh. I was wondering what your thoughts are as game designers, and if that is applicable to the world of TTRPG design. Given how thoughtful you both are with the questions you are asked, I know it would be helpful to someone like myself to hear those considerations and help even inexperienced folks become better at the choices we make at the table in prepping sessions, or determining what is the best system to run to meet our players' expectations. Teos?
Yeah. Well, what I think of is that, God, how wonderful is it when you are at the stage, as I've always been my entire life, that I can write bad poetry and be super happy with it. Or as happy as I would be if I think that if I got better at poetry, then I would have to really play by rules, and maybe I would enjoy it less or something like that. Like, I like my level of imperfection with poetry, and I like how so many poems just seem great to me, and I don't know why they are or aren't, because I am no expert at poetry. And to some extent, games have that duality in that the designers have to create ideally really good games that really follow their rules and understand their rules and break them in very specific ways, so that their material can be taken by DMs and broken in any which way, regardless of whether they understand whether it's right or wrong or whatever. And that's something kind of beautiful about our hobby, that can happen. What do you think, Shawn?
Art, yeah. Bringing this up as an artistic thing, coming from the same sort of background, I totally see where Toast Milk is coming from here. Yes, you should learn the rules, and then you should break them with abandon as you understand what you're doing. It's the old saying that art is the process and not the product. They say that because you learn the process, you get the product at the end of it, and now you know the process that you can tweak. So in that sense, I love that idea of knowing the process in order to do the process differently. We also have to remember that role-playing games are both art and machines. So these machines have a function. Things go in one end, something happens, a story comes out the other. And so with that also, you need to be able to know how to build the machine before you can replace the parts on the machine to get a different outcome. Oh, we're going to move this cog here and put this cog in. And oh, look, it's still going to work, but we're going to get a different outcome from the machine. And that, I think, is even more important than the art thing. It's the machine thing. It's we're just going to completely ignore backgrounds in my game. Okay, cool. What is your start? How do you get your starting equipment then? Right.
Right.
Are you just going to ignore the two other skill proficiencies that you would get? Right. Those things. Or we're going to replace backgrounds with this thing that gives all of this. Well, now you're creating this something that's even more important than your class. What does that mean? And how are you going to balance that out? So those are the sorts of things that Toast Milk is talking about. And you can transfer it from art to science, from art to craft, from however you want to quantify or qualify the different aspects of a role-playing game. But yes, it's never a bad idea to learn the rules, to learn the process before you start to try to break the process.
Absolutely.
However, you can create a fun one-page a role-playing game on an index card where you roll a d6 and just start telling stories based on the answer. And that's still a process. That's still a rule that you're learning, but you're starting with less of a complicated machine that you can mess around with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you are in the business of creating something that's more professional, that's going to go to other people, then these things really weigh heavily, right? You want to think through what it is. You want to know what DMs expect. If you're writing an adventure, for example, what are DMs expecting to see structure-wise? What are they expecting in terms of what information will be in which place and what order, so that it runs well, right? Breaking those expectations can be very difficult. But what you can do is break expectations around what an encounter does, or how monsters behave, or what kind of things the characters can do in a scene. And breaking those kinds of expectations and rules can be great, because those things provide really new experiences and stimulate the DM and give the DM lots of ideas. So I often try to break things when I'm designing adventures, knowing they may fail a bit and they may not work for every DM, but for some DMs, they'll create lots of really good ideas, right? So things like, what if the dungeon moves, right? Different parts of it move in different ways. It's not static. What if the NPCs are moving during the entire adventure, right? Things like that are really cool ideas. And when you see them and play with those ideas and break those sorts of expectations and rules, you can come up with some really cool stuff, sometimes with bad poetry.
For sure. But it's also important, as Teos said, to understand how the game works, how to understand what the DM needs to have in order to break it in a way that still allows this process to play out in some way.
Yeah, for sure.
In some way. Last question. This isn't a question, but we're just going to share this thought from Dr. Nick via Patreon. I've just listened to the horror segment of your podcast, and I wanted to throw in my 2 bits. From a psychological perspective, I'm a psychologist. I'm not, Dr. Nick is. Horror is weird. It's a technical term. It provokes stress responses that humans find to be negative, but people like it. 2 things pop out. 1, is a body a thing? And 2, is a brain a thing? And he uses the terms transfer of arousal and benign masochism. So good and bad body stress are the same thing. So if you get stress one way, like a jump scare, sexy vibes, whatever, it transfers to anything else that happens. If something scary happens and then something funny happens, the funny thing is funnier. So some scary stuff makes flatter content feel more intense. Benign masochism, I promise I'm getting to the point, says Dr. Nick, is a theory that people like to experience negative emotions as a form of inoculation to real emotions and stress. Your body has the same experience in a car accident that it does on a roller coaster, but you are safe and in control on the roller coaster, so it's fun. Horror and danger in games are a great example of safe danger. And who am I to argue with a psychologist?
It's really neat, and I continue to really love the discussion that's taking place on our Patreon. So thanks everybody for those discussions, and thank you, Dr. Nick.
Now we get to our news and commentary. We start with the good news. Giants of the Starforge, you can claim a free D&D adventure from D&D Beyond. It's an adventure from Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, serving as the adventure from Bigby Presents serves as a preview to this adventure, which is for 16th level characters. So if you've been asking for high level content, here is some high level content for you. You should claim it now, as these free things tend to disappear rather quickly on D&D Beyond. We have a link in the show notes, and you can also claim free digital dice and character sheets themed to the Baldur's Gate 3 video game.
Yeah, and
just
Shawn,
came in an email, and we also have a link. Yeah.
I was just gonna say for that first part, that 16th level adventure has been said it will be AL legal, and all of the material from Glory of the Giants will be AL legal in terms of player character options.
Okay, so if you are an Adventures League player, that is news for you. You now have AL legal high level content, which is even rarer than high level content. So if you want those freebies, you can go to D&D Beyond, link in our show notes to get to it. So that was the good news. A little bit of controversial news came out during Gen Con. Some people noted that some of the art previews for Glory of the Giant showed indication that a couple pieces might have been AI generated. There is a art for the Frost Giant Ice Shaper. Now, this broke while I was at Gen Con. I only heard bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Teos take over here.
Sure. So the artist has worked for D&D for some time. And of course, as with all books, this was art that was generated, some time ago in the process. And the artist has publicly said many times that they do AI work. They like NFTs and crypto and all this sort of stuff. And has a reputation for those kinds of stances. And they confirmed that they used AI in the process to generate this work. And, unfortunately, it sounds like maybe they used AI not just as a tool, but almost as an accelerator to get past sort of the sketches they were given, like maybe taking the sketches they were given to modify them. It's not entirely clear from reading this, but they deleted their initial posts saying that, I guess through Wizards, they've heard that illustrations will be reworked. And Wizards then, after all this pressure started happening in various social media locations, and despite the team being off at Gen Con, which I feel very bad for them having to deal with all this, Wizards did say that they were unaware of this and unaware of the artist's reputation, and that they are going to be clarifying their artist guidelines in response to this, which is really an oversight because Magic the Gathering already has these guidelines in place. So I don't know why Wizards would not have had it. And a lot of these articles, this appeared on the AP Newswire. It appeared in Fortune, as you noted here, Shawn. Gizmodo, of course, has an article. It's being talked about all over the place. The other part of this is one that seems to get lost in all of this discussion that focuses on this first part, but a different artist, April Prime, said on the same day that her art appears in the book, even though she's not credited in the book, and that her art has been modified, AI modified is the claim, by a different person or artist who is credited in the book. And I haven't heard that being addressed. I presume that this is because somebody's trying to resolve this in the background, and we'll get to hear what the outcome of this is. But that part concerns me a lot more, right? Yes, you should have a policy about whether you are going to allow AI tools or not in your work and to what extent. But the idea that an artist wouldn't even know that their work is modified by AI. Like April Prime's, I forget if it was their Blue Sky, I think it's their Blue Sky account says that they do not use AI, right? So this is a stance they've taken. So then to have somebody modify her work with AI, I mean, that's really not cool. It's very problematic. So I'm curious to see where this comes out further on. I think we've also heard that they're going to update the art in the book, but of course that would be once it gets printed for new prints for those who are using print copies. What do you think, Shawn?
Mhm. It's a multifaceted issue that here's what it comes down to. For me, it's if I was at Wizards, what would I do? Right? If there is an individual I can point to who was the problem, they would be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
But for an issue like this, where you have a contract with an artist, now I had heard that the contract that the artist had signed said they would not use AI. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But if it's the case where the contract said you do not submit AI generated art, and someone does, who are you firing? Right? Are we firing the art director? It's fine to get outraged, right? It's fine to express your opinion. Step into the shoes of the boss. Who gets fired? Are you person who is raging on Twitter going to walk in and fire someone who has, 2 kids and a mortgage? Who are you firing? If you can do that, then great. That's the level where I put these things. Now, if somebody at Wizards is taking someone else's art, changing it, putting it in the book, and not crediting that person, right? There's all these questions of, does this make sense? And that's where I was at the convention, right? Someone said, "Oh, Wizards used AI in their book, AI art in their book." I was like, "Oh, that's terrible. They shouldn't do that." And then like, no, they didn't know it was AI art. Some artists had put it in. I was like, okay, well, that's the artist's fault. Maybe it should have been vetted better. Okay, well, whose fault's that? I don't know. But then it was like, well, no, they only used AI to finish their piece. It was all of their own work. I was like, okay, well, if that's the case, then that's okay, because I use a spell checker. So oh no, that's not the case, was the next thing I heard, that they actually did use AI to, right? So it was this back and forth. And with every bit of information that was added, it was, okay, that's a completely different thing. Oh, no, okay, now that's a completely different thing. Oh, what I heard before wasn't true, so now that's it. It's I think Wizards has come out and said, we are not going to use AI art or any AI text or otherwise.
Right.
Great. That's what I need to hear. The next step is, Wizards, tell me, how are you going to make sure that happens? Maybe you can't.
Yeah,
maybe none of us can. Maybe if we were running a game company, maybe if we are involved in a game company, we are dealing with that same issue.
Yeah.
And there is no perfect way.
No.
We're going to buy an AI finding machine. Oh, people are now have a machine that will get around the AI finding machine. What do we do next? Right? I want to make games. I want people to have fun at the table. I don't want to have any more either fake or real outrage, unless we can point that outrage and fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and you and I have talked about this a lot of times. At the end of it, solving a specific case is never as important as setting in the policies in place that can prevent future problems, right? And it is complicated, as you said, because I recall at least 2 different Dragon Talk podcasts where the art director or someone involved in the art team would talk about, we receive the art from the person and there may not be enough time to request a change. So we may make a change. We may crop it, of course. Mm-hmm. We may change the color in the background to fit a sudden change in color palette, right? We may do any number of these things. Mm-hmm. And, what gets complicated is if you then give someone's art to another artist that isn't on staff that may use tools that you're not okay with, and that the original artist is not okay with, that's a problem, unless your contract very clearly spells that out. So my guess is that there is a break here in the process, and what they really need to do is go back and fix that process. It's probably less about this specific case and more about, what is it that they want to have to prevent these issues.
Yeah. I missed the beginning of your thing because of a technical issue, but I caught the end. So I'm going to ask you a question then. You and I have turned in work to Wizards and to other companies, written work, which was then taken and completely changed, words changed, whole thing's changed. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always okay with someone changing it, even to something I don't like. I don't know that I would love them to use AI to do it.
Sure. Oh no, I agree. I agree with that. So we're saying it's not okay to use AI to change the art, but it's okay for another artist to change the art.
I think that the reality of the process is that that's what has to happen, right? That you may, in any creative work, you may hire someone to do something and they may get you 90% of the way there. And either because of timing or just their capabilities, you may need to do that 10% yourself or have someone else do that 10%. And so I think that's just the way it has to be.
Right. Now, is there a level at which point it's not okay? Is that you wrote or drew this scene? We're going to take this piece of it, which we love, but we need to change everything in the background. So we're going to change that. Now we're still going to credit you, or do we?
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's where
do you send it back and say create the new? Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's where I would say I don't know that I need a policy for that. Like, yes, I would ideally like the directors, product managers, etc., to keep these things in mind, right? If you're going to take the text of an adventure I wrote or a subclass and you're going to just really make it unrecognizable, we should probably have a conversation, right? If you think I may not like the end result, maybe we should talk, just at least to set my mind at ease as a creator, right? Even if you have the full permission to do so contractually, we should probably have that conversation. I think where this gets particularly difficult is because we're talking about artists and we're talking about AI at a time when AI is on one hand a really cool tool that could make part of your process better. And on the other hand, what companies will use to eradicate your ability to make an income. Because capitalism. Capitalism will drive the companies to seek the cost of inputs down to zero. So the end goal is always going to be have no artists whatsoever, right? Like that just, if you can press a button, create the art, you will, because capitalism. Like that's what we're being driven to. So anything that is involved in the chain of making the AI use commonplace is another step towards that necessary end goal of lowering costs, right? We're currently in a place where like when Magic the Gathering art is created, premium prices are paid, right? And generally you can see that an artist goes from like charging X for commissions to an enormously higher Y after they become a Magic the Gathering artist, because they now have that capability to demand a high price. The reverse could happen with AI, right? To where they now can't get good income because most companies out there would say, well, as we see already with people creating DM's Guild products or drive-through products that just go, I'm not going to hire anybody for art, and I'm not going to use free art that's out there. I'm going to AI generate it and be done with it, because a lot of people out there can't tell the difference. And I'm not concerned about the livelihood of everybody else involved in the chain. I'm just taking care of myself.
And that brings us to a bit of news. We're going to skip ahead just a bit to Kickstarter updating its AI policy. Last week, we reported that the DM's Guild and OBS and Roll20 have a new AI policy prohibiting products that are all AI and requiring disclosure on the use of AI assets. Kickstarter now has a policy starting at the end of August requiring this same disclosure. It will ask project creators questions during project setup, and any AI used in the product will be reviewed and then will be put into a use of AI section. Products developing AI tools or tech must now disclose how the AI is trained. And we have a link in our show notes to that new Kickstarter policy. Let's move on from the AI version of this show to some good news. The ENnie Awards were held at Gen Con on Friday night, as they always are. Of course, the ENnies are first judges pick from a group of submissions for each category. Those judges then create a list of nominees, and then those nominees are voted on via popular vote. And they were there. I did not go. I did not see them. I actually have no idea who won what, so I'm getting my news directly from Teos.
Hey, sure. You know what it was good to be is Free League. Free League had so many wins, I may not be able to say them all in one breath. Let's try. Product of the Year with Best in RPG, Best Adventure, Best Interior Art, Best Cartography, Best Layout and Design, Best Monster Adversary, Best Setting. Wow. I'm curious whether anyone has won this many in the past, especially gold. So hats off to Free League. I mean, I've heard that Free League gets funds from the Swedish government, as I forget what the term of it is, but that enabled them to basically have a production value unlike any other. At the same time, they clearly take whatever those funds are and they make the most of it. I mean, they are gorgeous products, and so a lot of these are not really shocking because yes, they're interior art, photography, layout, and so on, but they're also creating Product of the Year, Best Monster Anniversary, Best Setting. That's really impressive.
Nice. Pelgrane Press did win gold for best writing and 2 silvers for Swords of the Serpentine by friend of the show, Kevin Culp, who we had on to talk about Gumshoe Systems. Radiant Citadel got a silver for best adventure. Avatar Legends was the gold winner for best family game and best rules. The Root RPG Quick Start was best free product. You carried on from here.
Yeah, best game was the Fabula Ultima Core rulebook. Best online content was Linda Codega's IO9 reporting. Best organized play was gold to Under the Cover of Stars, Marique Montalvan and Jens Sundquist, and silver to Cat's Paws by Jason Coe. So both Adventurers League adventures. In fact, the whole submission was Adventurers League. We've talked about this before, about it swings back and forth what this category is. Seth Skorkowski won gold for best podcast, silver going to How We Roll. Blackbird's RPG by Andrews McNeil Publishing won best production values gold. And we've got in our show notes the whole the link to all of them, so you can see all of them, or go to ENnie-awards.com. Yeah, it's, we have mixed feelings about awards and all that, but it's always nice to see some companies get recognition, and hopefully it leads to people finding new games and thinking about games in different ways.
Yep. Congratulations to nominees and the winners and anyone who makes role-playing games. It's all good. Let's finally get to our crowdfunding section. We had to skip it last week because we had so much news, but we can talk about it now, where the Storytelling Collective is raising scholarships for aspiring TTRPG creators. Storytelling Collective runs the RPG workshop courses to teach new role-playing game designers the ropes. These scholarships will be used to help those who cannot otherwise attend. You can donate at the $70 level. That money will be used for the scholarships, and you will get in return various digital benefits like 22 map packs, 10 art packs, 10 soundtracks, and several adventures. The campaign had an artificially low goal, and now it's met that goal and is looking for more funds to provide more scholarships.
And I did speak to one of the people involved with this, and they confirmed that some of the art packs, and I forget what something else, are available as for creators to use. So there are some commercially usable things here. So if you're a creator and you're looking for things like art packs, the $70 level isn't only giving something beneficial to others. You could then use some of these things in future products, so it's even more worth it.
Nice. We have MCDM launching Where Evil Lies, the Book of Boss Battles. It's 22 drop-in dungeons with dynamic combat encounters for 5th edition of D&D. You can get 2 layers for free at the backer kit page. The backers of the recently released Free Mortals Monster Book receive the PDF for free and get a discount on the hardcover version when it is released. And all of that will be available on backer kit, link in our show notes.
I think it's Where
And tell
Evil
me this
Lives.
little bit of what I say.
Lives. It's okay.
Where evil? Did I say lives?
I mean,
they're evil lives. James and Tricasso. Where evil lives? For sure. And give us this last bit of bizarre news about this anonymous bit person.
Fans, you never know what they'll do. So this Kickstarter for Cthulhu Wars was long overdue by Peterson Games. It was due in 2020 and has had a series of updates where it just lets down backers who paid $200 for the 4th printing of the game. And they were told not too long ago, yet again, that the game was made and finished, but that they lacked the funds to ship them. And I think this had happened more than once. We don't have the funds. So they can't even afford to send the finished game to everybody until an anonymous person bailed them out by giving Peterson Games $140,000 to allow the company to ship the remaining games to backers. And this was after they came up with some scheme where it was like, you could pay your shipping fee and then they would ship it to you. Like if you wanted the game bad enough, you could pay like beyond what you already agreed to pay. So this person just said, no, here's 140 grand. Ship this to everybody. But the company did say that they're penning an agreement that would mean, quote, that would mean the biggest shift ever to transpire for us. So maybe they're going to sell the rights or something like that to kind of get out of this area entirely. But it's a both fascinating story because of this donation and also the terrible, sad commentary on how shipping can be one of the barriers that just really hurts a company that sounds on paper as if they've had a successful Kickstarter.
Yeah. That would be the news for this week. So thank you for sharing your expertise, Teos, and thank you to our listeners.